By now, you've probably heard about the new potential home for Living Hope, and I want to just take this moment with Elder Pete Rupie to sort of walk through how we got here and some of the blessings as well as some of the tools we'd like you to consider as we get to this new opportunity. First, I just want to start that God has been faithful in every season to Living Hope, and really a building is nothing more than a tool for ministry. And God has provided in so many ways. We were at Pierce for a while, we got called up to a better tool. And for the last 7 or so years, we've enjoyed the tool at Brownell. I got to acknowledge that when we were first there, all I could see was the blessings of Brownell. But over time, I've seen some deficits, and I'm pretty convinced that you've seen some of them as well. Every time we worship in the summer for the worship at the park, and every time we worship on the stage, people come up to me and say, "What a blessing it is to worship right next to one another." I like to refer to that as worship intimacy. And what if we were able to take our quality worship and have that worship intimacy experience all the time? And that's really part of what has driven this opportunity to look at a different space is what if we could really improve worship? And so you'll look at now a picture of what that worship facility might look like. You see it be very intentional that we have space for everything that we do there, but particularly for worship. And notice how the chairs are close together. It'll be a great way for us to enjoy that worship intimacy and the quality worship. But it's not just about worship. We will be able to have access 24/7 to be able to do everything that we do in one central place. And so whether it's a congregational meal that we usually have to arrange at some other location, whether it's a wedding or a funeral that we're wrestling with, whether we can rent somebody else's church or do it at Peter's, whether it's even one of our rave groups that meets at Christ the King, we will be able to host all of that in one location. So it really would be a tool that allows us to do the way that we do church even better. And next picture you're going to see is one of a layout of the entire footprint of the building so that you can see the space that we would have access to. Also give us a 24/7 sort of advertising into the community. And the next picture you're going to see is the sort of a mock-up of what the outside might look like with Living Hope up on it. But third, and maybe even more important, definitely more important than the second, is that we would have 24/7 footprint in a real neighborhood. You're looking at a satellite visual right now of where our space would be in relationship to the neighborhood that it's actually in. And so we rejoice in the opportunity to take that Great Commission and really reach out in mission and in outreach to a real neighborhood. At Brownell, we appear for 3 hours on a Sunday morning and we vanish. And it's really hard for the community to get in touch with us and to be blessed by our constant presence in their neighborhood. And so we really see this as an opportunity to be a 24/7 presence, to partner with local schools, to reach out in mission, and to make a difference with God's love in this neighborhood. So now I'm going to ask Pete Rupie to come over and walk you through a couple more things. We're really excited about this and want you to understand how we got here and some of the cost considerations of it.
Hey, Peter Rupie here. I wanted to, before we talk about the two documents, I wanted to just give you a little idea of how what our criteria are for a potential more permanent building, or any building actually, for Living Hope. First is the location. Our goal is to have a church somewhere north and south between 10 Mile and Cadieux, and east and west between I-94 and Lake St. Clair. So that's sort of our geographical area. We think that's where our building, our worship space at least, should be. Followed by building size. So our church is 100 to 150 people. That requires somewhere between 5 and 10,000 square foot of space. Most churches in this area are in that 10, 20 or more thousand square foot. Grosse Pointe Woods, for example, was 30,000 square feet. It doesn't make any sense to have a building that's too large for impact of future growth, that type of thing, particularly in a leasing situation. It just doesn't, you're paying for something you may never use. So the point is, we want to stay in that 5 to 10,000 foot range. So the building has to hit that criteria. And finally, parking. That's probably the biggest stumble we've had to this, finding there's just so few properties that have adequate parking. A church building requires, by ordinance, one parking space for every 2 seats. So if you have 100 people, that typically at 10, you need 50 car spaces. 150, 75 car spaces. One of the reasons we became more interested in the starboard property was it had the location, it had the size of the space at 8,000 square feet, but most importantly, it had 164 car parking. We're proposing leasing a quarter of that, so that's 40 car parking. And then on a Sunday morning, there's not a lot of other tenants competing for that space. I mean, the Secretary of State was there. You can see that can hold a lot of cars. This should be, parking should not be an issue. So this became a rather unique space for us. So looking at the two documents you have, there's a facility option comparison matrix. So that, that's is broken into 4 columns. One represents renting a school, which we're doing at Brownell. The second one looks at leasing a commercial building, which we're proposing at Starboard, and the numbers in that column are actually budget numbers, so they're real numbers. And the next two one is purchasing a commercial building. The second one is buying vacant land and building one from scratch. So we wanted to look at, we got this from portablechurch.com, just to see, what are the choices and how does the impact of these decisions make in terms of time, talent, and treasure for the congregation. But this all falls under the umbrella of what is God's will for our church. So you can see in the blue column, the left column, that's Brownell. So our rent is $75,000 per year. And there's really not a whole lot of other costs. We've got $2,500 we spent on microphones and certain things set up for childcare. But basically, that's just sort of a token amount that is needed because everything's provided for us. And then the next column, headed in green, is leasing a commercial building. So there in the first column, we have $150,000 per annual year. That's your annual cost for the base rent, the common area maintenance costs, the utilities, the janitor service, et cetera. And then the next two, the peachy color one is purchasing a commercial building, and the red one would be buying vacant land and building one from scratch. And as you can see, those costs, the operating costs, are lower because once you put all the money up front of your initial cost, so it's naturally lower. But it's not significantly lower. What's significantly different is the next column when you talk about sticks and bricks. So there, Brownell is zero, of course, but then leasing a building, our general contractor that our first bidder is, he did a fantastic job of breaking down every single cost. The owner had requested that. So $300,000 was the numbers he came up with to make the design as we first propose it. We don't know if that's the final design, but it's basically figure $300,000 for us to do the complete build out of this space. The next column, in the peach column, it looks like owning a building, commercial building, would be $1.3 million just up front, because there's that thought of buying a church for $500,000. You see them on Heritage was on the market for $425,000. That's just the beginning. You have all the other environmental aspects, the surveying, and mainly just making the building something that we can use, because buildings that are on the market that are churches, they're really well loved by the time that they're put up for sale. That's sort of the last thing that a church would typically do based on our 7-year experience in seeing. So there's a significant upgrade of, let's say, delayed maintenance that needs to be addressed before we can occupy that space. And then finally, building from scratch. It's great to have a new building, but you're looking at $3.5 million. The land is $500,000. You've got $200 a foot would not be unreasonable at all for this is a public assembled building that would have all kinds of extra ordinances that other commercial properties might not have, accessibility and things like that. So and then you still have that parking issue on the land. So none of these things the initial costs for all of them are high, but the owning is significantly higher than a leasing situation. And then the next column, next set of rows talks about what would you put in that space, your furniture, et cetera. So your audio visual equipment. And so we have $55,000 as our kind of budget number for what we would put inside the starboard space. If you were to own either buying an existing or building from scratch, they would be higher because you'd be kind of looking at a longer term situation. So we're at that $140,000 to $200,000 range. So what does that all mean? At the end, you have this initial cost that we propose that our initial cost for starboard will probably be in that $350,000 range. That would be somewhere in that range would be our pledge drive amount. We haven't totally established that, but that's what we're thinking. As in contrast, so owning a building, that's already existing would be 1.4 million, and by building one from scratch, you're at $3.5 million. So that's a significant difference in terms of need to pledge, impact on our ministries. It doesn't mean either one is right or wrong. It's just significantly different. So the next chart, we want to look at the flow chart. I think you have a sense of where we came to this point, but the question is, what are we doing forward? Where does the congregation fit into that? So this flow chart is designed to try to kind of flesh that out. So you have a sense that you have a say in this situation and you have some input, because we're all trying to make this, ultimately, is this God's will for Living Hope? And we can't do this all on our own. We need you. We need you for all kinds of input. So let's look at this chart. So the beginning, we're at the very top. We're at that diamond at the top. By February 15th, signed the letter of intent. We did that. We did that last Thursday. And then we go to the blue square. So we've decided, at least, let's get into this. I should explain. The letter of intent is a non-binding agreement. This allows us a due diligence period between, we have all the basic terms of the lease spelled out in the letter of intent, but it's not a formal lease. So there's a period that typically owners or sellers and buyers, or owners, tenants and landlords have, for the tenant to do their due diligence to make sure this is the right fit. You need some kind of an agreement. It's more than a verbal. The terms are spelled out. So the lease industry standard will make this, the lease will reflect greatly what the letter of intent shows. So we have 4 months basically to determine, is this God's will for the church? Is the congregation behind it? Can we afford it? Is the plan acceptable by the city? And if all those things fall into place, we're very likely to go forward with that. So we're at the blue upper right corner, blue rectangle. We rolled it out to the congregation on Sunday. You're hearing this today, so we're rolling it out to you as well. We need your feedback at that point. That brings us to that green diamond. So if there's overwhelming positive feedback from the congregation, we're going to move forward to the next step. If it's overwhelmingly negative, we're going to pause and reflect, and maybe we should abandon this project. So far it's been pretty positive. So far we're moving forward. So the next step is this yellow diamond, the pledge drive. So there's going to be a pledge drive, and that's a very significant decision-making point for the congregation. This is a time where we put our treasure on the line to see if we're really behind it, are we willing to commit? Are we willing to sacrificially be part of this process? So that is there as another point for the congregation to have input. And then there's 2 other points. The third point would be, once, assuming we hit the mark on the pledge drive, we'll go further with the architect, get our final permit drawings. We'll apply for permits from the city. If they approve of that and the plan is still in the reasonable range and we've met our budget, we'll have our general contractors bid on the project. And if that lines up with the budget and the city's approved the drawings, the session will make the final decision, the 4th checkpoint, let's say. Is this something we should go forward to in leasing Starboard? So that's kind of basically the nutshell. There's many points where we can step away from this. This process is unavoidable. We need to go through it. So please, we're looking for your feedback. May God's will be done. Thank you very much.